The do's and don'ts of Kubernetes.
Hey, Kim. I heard there's something going on with Kubernetes again.
Yes. Kubernetes is in the spotlight again, Stan. So it's all the things that you should know about installing Kubernetes and the different security hazards of it that we should watch out for. First of all, Kubernetes itself, um, there are there are minor versions to Kubernetes, and quarterly Kubernetes always does an update. So those that manage the Kubernetes should always update to the latest version because they get rid of all of the security hazards of or patching and whatever other bug fixes that are in Kubernetes on a quarterly basis. The first step they want you to do is to set up your role-based access control or RBAC to your application with applications or within Kubernetes, your Kubernetes as a whole for role-based access. The second thing they want you to do is to make sure your security teams, when they're installing new applications, deployments, to look for configuration changes to the application, whether it's going to open up new holes or whatever it may be. They want you to make sure you look at that because a lot of application developers will install new applications, whereas they don't know what they're opening up for Kubernetes. Finally, you want to put in network tools to look at your different Kubernetes settings, or whether it's Helm based, or to check for new CVEs that are out there within your applications or within Kubernetes. There are different tools you can use. And so that's what you want to look at. Kubernetes as a whole also allows you to install third-party applications. Those applications can, just like an Nginx controller or whatever it may be that opens up ports to the internet, you want to make sure those third-party applications are locked down and that you're not allowing anything in, because there's too much of malware that's being targeted for Kubernetes containers and so forth. So you want to put in the necessary tools in place to check your platform, to check those platforms. Those tools can scan, make sure your containers are up to par, your Kubernetes versions are up to par, and so forth. So those are the things that you want to look at.
Now, Kubernetes is a platform for deploying basically like other applications to a whole bunch of servers. Is that right?
Kubernetes as a whole has a version within itself that affords different bugs within that application itself. But then the third-party applications on top of that is what you want to make sure that you're watching out for. But Kubernetes itself allows for root access. So that's why they want you to set up role-based access in order to restrict whoever accesses that cluster.
Kim, do you know if there are other orchestration platforms like Kubernetes that could also benefit from these types of security settings?
I think all cloud orchestrated platforms have the same issues. You just, I think Kubernetes is targeted more because it's more mostly used when you're using Docker and so forth for your containers. And Docker is, also Docker is also targeted as well. So it's the containers that houses these VMs that hackers are looking for. But a lot of customers are pushing toward Kubernetes because of the wide support in Azure for AKS clusters, and AWS for the EKS clusters. So since they're, more widely used, and supported more so, that is why they're mostly the target for them. With Kubernetes, a lot of customers will expose their well, I won't say openly expose it or knowingly expose it, but there are applications to put in place for Kubernetes when you're setting up like an ingress control, because you have to, because it's separate from a compute cluster. So you have your compute cluster, and then you have your Kubernetes, which is in the background, where you have to have ingress routes set up to get there. But when people set up their ingress gateway or their ingress, so they'll use Istio. I don't know if you've heard of Istio. So they'll use Istio gateways to send their ingress routes to, if they don't have a standard load balancer that could allow the traffic to get to them. So in a compute cluster, you have a load balancer that you can send traffic to your compute cluster. Within Azure or AWS, you can use a load balancer. But as far as Kubernetes goes, it's not accessible unless you set up an ingress controller and ingress routes to it, right?
It's kind of like where we always tell everyone, like, don't expose your administrative interface to the internet. So I think with Kubernetes, it's kind of like an administrative interface for all of your Docker containers to be deployed. So you really have to be careful how you allow that to be exposed. You got to take precautions at the firewall level or at the load balancer level. You got to really segregate your administrative interface from your kind of data plane, or I guess application plane.
Exactly.
So I think it's really, really good advice. Thank you.
Exactly.